All right. This Natural Resources Committee meeting will come to order. Today is Monday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day of 2025. And this is a hearing of the Natural Resources Committee. Madam Secretary, if you would, call the extensive roll.
Representative Guyman.
Here.
Present. Representative Orgeron.
Here.
Present. Representative Bryant. Representative Carrier. Representative Chasson. Representative Coates.
Here.
Present. Representative DeWitt. Representative Domain. Representative Travis Johnson. Representative Kerner. Representative Lacombe. Representative Landry. Representative Mack.
Here.
Present. Representative McCormick. Representative Reiser. Representative Ventrella. Representative Zerang. Have 4 House members present.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. All righty. If you please silence, as I just did, your cell phones. If you need to take a call, please step out of the committee room. If you wish to give testimony, which we hope some of you or many of you will, please fill out a white witness card, sign it, and hand it to the Sergeant at Arms that's walking around here. All testimony you give is it's an attestment that all testimony you give is true. Normally, green cards represent support, red cards in opposition, but for this particular one, white cards for information purposes only will suffice, since we will not be taking any votes. All witness cards are maintained in committee records, including those of the persons who wish to give comment without wishing to speak. At this point in time, I would like to call Chairman Guyman to the table to give some opening remarks.
Can I make them from here?
You most certainly may.
All right.
Chair allows it. Vice Chair in the chair as well. Sorry.
Am I on?
Not yet. I'll.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. So this study resolution was passed in the spring session of 2024 to deal with solar and wind, and so this is the second half of that resolution to study the issue. We did solar back, I think, in July, maybe. A nice little 8.5-hour hearing. So we don't hopefully anticipate that today, but it's just a hearing to talk about an issue that we know is coming, and to educate the committee and to maybe identify any areas of concern that need to be addressed legislatively in the future, not this session, hopefully, but in the future. And that is the nature of the reason for that I filed the resolution last spring. And so we're here today to fulfill that commitment to study this issue. Trying to get it, the Vice Chair and I have tried to get this in before session because we know it's going to be crazy during session, so we wanted to make sure to get it done now. So we appreciate all of you coming out at this time to help us understand this issue and to share ideas and answer questions. And we do appreciate your time being here, and we welcome Representative Landry to the committee as well. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for handling this and scheduling our speakers, and look forward to what we hear today.
All right. Thank you very much. Yep. My subsequent comment would be the primary topics that we're looking for is how Louisiana can benefit economically by progressing wind, both offshore and onshore in Louisiana, changes or adaptations in current workforce and changes to workforce to better facilitate it, as well as the supply chain. As many of you know, Louisiana's been involved in the existing supply chain, whether it be transporting numerous numbers of onshore wind turbines up and down the intracoastal from manufacturing locations in central Tahoe area out to to Texas, or the companies based along the southern coast of Louisiana who work in fabrication and pipe fitting, production of tools and ancillary tools and equipment, including the foundations for America's first offshore wind farm, Block Island. And lastly, the vessels that basically worked historically in the Gulf of Mexico that are now, some of them up on the East Coast currently working, and all the other companies as well. So just basically that workforce supply chain, how we're already entrenched in it, but what can be done to tune our economy better. At the same time, we also want to hear from thank you. Representative Reiser, let the record show, has made it as well, and Representative Lacombe. Thank you very much for joining us. As well as listening to any opponents or entities with concerns, explicitly asked Audubon Society to if they had any knowledge or any desires to speak on avian strikes or any kind of concerns with stakeholder engagements. Thank you, Mr. Eustace, for showing up here from Healthy Gulf. Basically, just overall ocean, in the offshore wind space, ocean usage, and on onshore as well, just as we had done with solar, basically taking agricultural land away. So we hope that the speakers that are here today are going to give us some insight as to the benefits to Louisiana, the tweaks and changes that can be made to better facilitate wind energy in Louisiana, and also the concerns and issues that we have. With that, I'm going to call, I guess, our first speaker, Miss Jenny Netherton, with the Southeastern Wind Coalition. Thank you very much. Cameron Poole, Stacy Ortega, and Blake Canfield. Was I supposed to do Blake first? No? You sure, Blake? Okay. Yes, go ahead.
And I believe I mailed a presentation on Friday. Did you receive that?
No? Slides? You have them?
I have them on my laptop. I emailed to the same place I sent my statement. I responded with a link.
But the record showed that Representative Chasson is also blessing us with his appearance. I thought I had seen slides. No, emailed.
Did you get Joe Bear's number?
Joe Bear was just here.
Let's see.
Apologies for the technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Here it is.
You got it. Wind energy in Louisiana.
Can we get it on there?
We got a flash drive. You have a flash drive? No?
I don't have a flash drive. Do you have a
I got
flash drive? Cam always has a flash.
In the interim, while we solve that, would it be all right if we switch presenters to Mr. Canfield? Yeah, please come to the table, Mr. Canfield. We'll get your presentation set up, Ms. Netherton.
Thank you. My apologies.
Representing the Department of Energy and Natural Resources, Mr. Blake Gainfield. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. The Department of Energy and Natural Resources' role with wind is primarily focused on offshore wind, and that's in part because our two major programs that are involved are, one, our Office of Mineral Resources and State Mineral and Energy Board, who's in charge of leases and operating agreements for the use of state-owned water bottoms, and the majority of the state-owned water bottoms, of course, are in coastal Louisiana and offshore. And then second, our Office of Coastal Management, which does coastal permitting. Both of those are going to have a role to play with any offshore wind capabilities. I would say generally, the department looks at the fact that we are known worldwide for being an energy state and for having done many, many, many years of offshore oil and gas activity, and a lot of the technical expertise, manufacturing, and other attributes that make us, very good at oil and gas, I think also can carry over to offshore wind. So we have, in the past, entered into 2 operating agreements for state-owned acreage for offshore wind. We also have created a roadmap group that is working to study a lot of the details. While we see a lot of benefits in offshore wind, we of course need to make sure that anything that we do is potential impacts-wise are something that we can address from a regulatory standpoint. I'm sure, as you'll hear from other folks that want to testify today, a large part of our view on the permitting side is trying to make sure we get things right when it comes to avian impacts, when we get things right from a commercial fishing standpoint, from shrimping standpoint, as well as look at it from alternative uses, making sure that we are being smart about the permitting side and or any future leases that were entered into to not preclude other uses where possible. Our roadmap, I think, is we've had created an advisory council. I think has had 2 meetings so far. Is that correct, or 3? 3 meetings, and we have, I believe, one later this week. And a lot of the stakeholders in there are pretty diverse, and trying to make sure we have a broad set of insights into what we need to consider to make sure that we're able to both to lease and or permit this going forward. I do think, or we do expect, that this will have an impact in the future on the processes that we undertake, just to make sure that we're doing this correctly. I guess with that very general opening statement, I'm happy to answer any questions. We too are interested in hearing from everybody today and look forward to working on this issue going forward.
All right, I'm going to look at the board and see if any of the representatives here have any questions. We do have one from Chairman Guyman.
Good morning, Blake. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, yeah.
Do you have, and you may have said it before I walked back in, but do you have any permitting or what would be the right word, restrictions, requirements, guidelines, ordinances for wind as far as it's onshore? Or is that something that is in the future?
Yeah, so
I would hit him, but yeah, in the future.
We don't have any wind-specific permitting programs. So right now, I think your coastal permitting would be the only thing that would be involved, and that can be both onshore or offshore if it's within the coastal zone, which of course is just the southern portion of the state. But we do not have a statewide or a wind-specific regulatory program.
Okay, so if and I don't know if this is even a thing, but we'll find out as the day goes on. That's why everybody's here. But if someone wanted to do a project onshore out of the coastal zone, what would be the process, or would we have to promulgate a rule prior to that project taking place, or would it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think our focus has been so much on the offshore. I would hate to misspeak about what the process is on onshore, because there very well could be things I'm not aware of.
Okay, fair enough. So possibly we need to look at, as we see, or if we see onshore beginning to develop, we may need to look at some sort of rule promulgation from your department or some legislative action.
Yeah, I mean, again,
I'm not trying to box you in.
No, I know, and I guess it's more just my ignorance. I don't want to say that something's needed if before hearing from others, because it may already be addressed. But obviously, if y'all feel something needs to be addressed and it isn't addressed, the legislation would be the way to go.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
I myself have one question about the offshore or nearshore state lease operating agreements, and I think both of the projects that had signed those agreements, we're talking about the offtake being through cables that would come back on shore, and in what if the areas that both of these projects would be at had stranded pipelines or existing decommissioned pipelines? What would be DNR's position for those? Had any of the discussions with those operating agreement holders progressed to that point of how that would be handled?
Yeah, not to my knowledge. I don't think they've gotten to that point yet. My understanding, for instance, the one that's off the coast of Cameron, a lot of the discussions I've heard have been more about the studies that they want to undertake. They're trying to get some, I guess, more specific real-time data and information. And again, my understanding is they're working with both our staff, Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and some others to try to get that. But generally speaking, the coastal permitting side of things wants to make sure that you are using corridors that already exist where possible. However, you could end up with a situation where just the uses themselves have some conflicts about, safety reasons, concerns about effects on either the operation of the pipeline or of this cable. So I think those would be kind of specifically looked into if that was proposed, how best to deal with that.
All right. I know from past experiences on the East Coast, the geophysical, the geotechnical surveys that were done, magnometer sweeps and all of that, they literally wanted in the areas that they were planning on putting offshore wind sites, they literally wanted like a pristine seafloor, taking out any barrels, unexploded ordnance, anything that was just not natural, basically got investigated, highlighted, being having at that time, back in my previous life, being a vessel operator who had a boat that had pads that went down to the seafloor, all of this information was given to us. So I understood how clean they wanted the area to be. And in Louisiana, I don't know if we're currently as clean, we have a different situation, a different historical mantra of operating here. So it would have been I think some kind of way benefit would have come to our ecology if wherever these projects would take place. So that's why I wanted to know if any discussions had ever progressed to that. But that's it. That's the only question I had. Anybody else from the panel has, any other member has a question? Nope. If not, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you all.
Mr.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate your testimony. All right. Next, we're going to bring back Ms. Netherton, and Sergeant at Arms now is armed with a presentation that will load up.
Sergeant at Arms is armed.
He's armed. And let the record show Ms. Ventrella, Representative Ventrella, has arrived.
No, I don't.
All right. Can we switch on the presentation, Ms. Netherton?
Yes, if I know how to do that.
You did that?
I'm going to try to open this in Acrobat so it'll look pretty, but if not, then it'll be simple enough. You know what? Let's just go ahead with this. Thank you all for having me here. I really appreciate it. I apologize for the technical difficulties, and I hope that the information presented will really make it worth it. So my name is Jenny Netherton, and I'm with the Southeastern Wind Coalition. We are a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the development of wind energy in the southeastern U.S. Our footprint covers from Virginia down to Florida over to Louisiana, and I run our Louisiana program along with Carla, our associate who's in the audience. My background is actually in law, so I will happily cover the land-based permitting question asked earlier. And I am a Louisiana native, so I'm very excited to be able to work on something that I think really is good for the future of Louisiana. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a 101, just comparing offshore wind to land-based wind. So offshore wind projects are generally larger in scale and in size. So offshore wind turbines are almost an order of magnitude larger than land-based wind turbines, which means that those offshore projects can really get up into this utility scale generation. So when you think about kind of how this is working, it's essentially having a power plant in the Gulf that we can draw on without any fuel cost. So permitting for offshore wind is done through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, who also regulates federal oil and gas leases that I'm sure everyone is very familiar with. Offshore wind does have a very long development timeline. Typically, it's about 10 years from when these offshore federal areas are leased to when you actually have power being generated. So these are, in thinking about this as similar to a power plant, those planning processes are also very, complementary. As far as land-based wind goes, and I will tell you that some people call this onshore wind, and I call it land-based wind because I am mostly talking about it, and onshore and offshore sound a lot the same when you say them. So I will refer to this as land-based wind, sometimes referred to as onshore wind. So these projects are also utility scale and can range from about 20 megawatts to 300 megawatts and are traditionally located on private property. I'll get into a little bit more about the areas in Louisiana that we're seeing interest in and kind of how those technologies have advanced. As far as permitting goes, the vast majority of permitting happens at the state and local level. So the federal permits that are required for a land-based wind farm, as Blake mentioned, you would need any Coastal Zone Management Act permits that are required. You would also need any Army Corps of Engineers 401 or 404 Clean Water Act permits. Additionally, you need a Federal Aviation Administration authorization due to the height of turbines. They like to ensure that there are no conflicts with military training areas. And then lastly, you would also need an Endangered Species Act takings permit for any incidental wildlife. So that would be the kind of regulatory scheme of that. And then there are quite a bit of local ordinances that have been enacted. I am happy to get you more information on kind of model ordinances and why the ordinances that have been effective are effective. We have some actually really great information coming out of Texas where they have, obviously had a long timeline of land-based wind development. So I'm going to get into a little bit of offshore wind policy. I am not going to belabor this too long. But broadly speaking, for offshore wind, there are both federal and state regulatory processes. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management does the leasing as well as the adverse impact analysis for federal areas. And then state governments also do play a role with federal developments in terms of any sort of utility regulation, which here would often happen at the PSC. State governments often enact policies that can help act as drivers towards regulatory policy. And then also any sort of contracts that might be involved with the state are also included in that framework. So offshore wind is cost competitive. I will let my colleague Cam get a little more into numbers later, but I did want to show this Lazard's 2024 levelized cost of energy report that really takes into consideration a wide variety of factors. And you can see that both offshore and onshore wind are cost competitive when considered over the life of a project. One of the really big benefits of wind energy, regardless of whether it's offshore or onshore, is that your fuel cost is always zero. So although these projects often are higher upfront, you have very stable prices and you are not subject to seasonal or other, drivers that may affect prices of things like natural gas. And I just wanted to highlight a little bit of the economic opportunity here without belaboring it too much. In particular, the right portion of this slide is from the Port of New Orleans, where Edison Schwest Offshore's Echo Edison service operation vessel was christened. And we have seen a really big interest, particularly with Louisiana's rich shipbuilding history, with offshore wind needing these vessels. So I'll get into a little bit of the benefits of offshore wind. I know that these are covered in the statement that I submitted to the committee, so I would encourage you, if you're looking for the actual facts and figures and sources, everything is included in that statement that was provided to you. But this is a once-in-a-generation economic opportunity, the same way that Louisiana has capitalized on oil and gas. We have the opportunity to do this here. It's good for our grid. It has a complementary generation profile to other resources, and particularly solar, which means that during times of high load demands or even hurricanes, this can provide an alternate source of energy that is working for some places. Wind is also here and now. It has been operating at utility scale in Europe for decades at this point, and it is a proven resource that just has not made it to the US in quite the way that it can. And again, I won't belabor this too much. We have increasing energy demand. We're all very aware of that. We've seen the recent Meta AI data center announcement that's very exciting for Louisiana, and meeting those increasing energy goals are going to be a very important part of wind development. I mentioned the fluctuating fuel prices, but this has an example from Dominion Energy's Coastal Virginia offshore wind project, which is expected over the life of the project to save at least $3 billion in customer fuel costs, which is a pretty significant number. And then offshore wind is also reliable when we need it most. Offshore wind is particularly good during cold winter mornings when natural gas prices are at their highest and natural gas is not generating at its most effective rate. So this is just a little more information about the Coastal Virginia offshore wind project. This will be the largest wind farm in the U.S. once it is built. It is being built by Dominion Energy, who is a utility up in Virginia. It is on time and on budget and is having a levelized cost of energy of about $77 per megawatt hour, which is a very good rate of return for a project like this. Dominion has also commissioned a wind turbine installation vessel, of which there are 0 U.S. flagged so far. That vessel is called Charybdis, and that will be later this year, I believe in a couple months, will be christened and begin operation on their farm up in Virginia. So getting a little bit more into Louisiana and what our advantage is for offshore wind, we have the largest port complex in the Western Hemisphere. We have over 450 existing supply chain companies that can easily work on offshore wind. I will let Cam get into those numbers as well. Many job opportunities and potential for net economic impact. And then as the constitutional amendment in November showed, 73% of voters approve of using these federal offshore energy revenues towards coastal restoration, which is a significant number. And then furthermore, we have this world-class university and college system that is really stepping up to meet these new demands with wind energy. Again, I won't belabor Louisiana reports, but in particular, Port Fourchon, Avondale Global Gateway, and the Port of Lake Charles have really seen the opportunity to grow their business from offshore wind exploration. And, anything that can, get our ports this more consistent and stable business is always a good thing. All right, so I'm going to move more into land-based wind now and hopefully be able to answer some of your questions with that. And the first question when people ask is always, where is the land-based wind? And I love this chart because it shows how little land-based wind we have in the Southeast. And I don't like this chart because of how it sinks us in and makes us look like nothing is happening. But this shows kind of where historical wind development is, as well as the fact that we have really not seen that in the Southeast. So how do we solve this problem? We build turbines taller. So these are wind resource maps provided by NREL, and you can see in these maps at 80 meters, which is a more historical hub height for turbines that you might see in Colorado on the West Coast, our wind just isn't really strong enough at that height. However, when you go a little bit taller, if you get to about 200 meters, you can see immediately how much more consistent that wind speed is. And so this is what the developers are really seeing the opportunity for because of the technological advances that have been made. So one of the advantages of this region as well is flat farmland and tall turbines. The Delta region has vast agricultural lands with minimal development constraints, and wind energy is particularly a good co-location for farming. A wind turbine only takes about 1/4 to 1/2 acre out of agricultural production per turbine. So as opposed to something like solar, where you really are losing quite a bit of your farmable land, wind has a much better co-location profile. And we have a really interesting case study of this with the Delta Wind Project that began operation last summer just south of Memphis, Tennessee. So this project, well, I'll show you a little bit more of this, but this can show you really that the Delta region as well as the wind resource, and you can see kind of why that area is seeing so much interest and development with those two things going together. So this is a map of the MISO interconnection queue. MISO is the Mid-Continent System Operator that controls transmission across the Southeast. This map shows the projects that are currently in their queue, which means that developers have gotten these projects to a stage where they are looking to make sure that they can get it onto the grid. So you can see we have these 5 land-based projects in Louisiana. It's hard to see, but this project kind of right by Lafayette, there are actually 2 dots there. And then you can see even more up in the Arkansas and Mississippi area. So you can see that compared to what has historically been happening, this is a lot of growth. I will note that just because a project is in the MISO queue does not mean that it is going to be built. For a variety of reasons, you are incentivized to get in the MISO queue as soon as you think that your project might come to fruition. But this is still a very strong signal that these projects have landowner agreements and that they are really coming to close to being built. And so here is a case study of the Delta Wind Farm in Tunica County, Mississippi. If you are ever driving up I-55, I encourage you to go see them. They are really incredible to see. But you can see that they are, in fact, the tallest turbines in the nation at 692 feet. This project actually began development in 2017 by a company called Steelhead and was then purchased by AES, who are the operators of the project. You can also see that the energy off-taker for this project is Amazon, who has a significant investment in Mississippi at this point. So I just wanted to take this to show you how big these turbines really are. You can see the trucks that are parked below the turbines, and then as well as all of the agricultural land that is around there. So again, very excited to have a proof of concept for the Southeast, and excited to see what development will look like in Louisiana. So thank you all for your time, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Right. The good chairman sitting in my seat over there was the first question. Chairman Guyman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Very interesting presentation. Thank you very much for that. I do have a few questions because I'm going to try to frame this the right way. I'm not pitting solar versus wind, but you kind of did that. You did say that wind is not as big of an issue for co-location and farming, et cetera.
For co-location
But
farming, yes.
I guess the comment I would make is that each of these, solar and wind, both come with their own unique set of problems. And maybe problems in the right word. Concern. Your own set of concern. Like you said it, solar takes up a lot of real estate and has an impact on farming and other use of that property, where wind may not. So you can have cattle and farming and other things going on while you have wind. Is that correct?
That
At least
is
that's
correct.
what I observe when I drive through Kansas.
That is correct, yes.
The height of the ones in Kansas versus this new 700-foot height. Do you know what the Kansas models are? Are those also 700 feet or about?
Those are a bit shorter. I believe those are closer to a more traditional turbine height of about 400 feet.
Okay.
But I will note that one interesting thing that we're seeing, and why I'm hesitant to make direct comparisons, is that a lot of what is readily available for us to see is in Texas and Kansas and Oklahoma, which were really some of the first places to actually have turbines installed. And so what we're seeing now is that many of those projects are at the end of their life cycle and being repowered. So some of those concerns that existed for those projects are being dealt with, as they are repowering them. So I do want to make clear that the issues are similar, but many of those older turbines in Oklahoma, Texas, et cetera, may not be exactly applicable to Louisiana development with new technology.
Do you think the Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas model will go to the 700 feet also? Or is that just here?
I think it depends on the wind resource of the area, and I wouldn't say that that is guaranteed everywhere here. Those sorts of decisions depend really specifically on wind speeds on the property itself.
Pretty windy up in Kansas.
It is.
The project you mentioned, I had a question, any projects here, and you pointed out Lafayette area, that would be a 700-foot project?
No, we do not know. We do not have that
know
sort of, that number is specific to the project south of Tunica County. We do not have those sorts of numbers for any other project.
Okay, and what is the life cycle? You mentioned the life cycle, the ones in Kansas. What is a life cycle of one?
Traditionally, turbines are built for about 20 years,
20 years, okay.
After which they will be repowered traditionally, and that generally means that you can generate more power on the same footprint with advances in technology.
Okay, so this leads me to my final two thoughts. And you mentioned local and state level ordinances, similar to solar. And as we've been working on solar, and kind of throwing the net out nationwide to see what other states have done, what other issues there are, what concerns there are. When you do that, you also get linked into the wind, because it's like wind and solar kind of go hand in hand in like Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, other states there, some of the other states further north. The concerns are similar but different. So not to talk about solar, but this is my point. To me, we started having solar projects here in Louisiana based off of the ordinances of the individual parishes. Unfortunately, some of those parishes had no ordinances, so we have this wild, wild west is what we call it. No consistency. Some parishes doing a pretty good job at it, some parishes not so much, and we can drive around and see those not so much projects. My concern would be that if we get wind projects in the Lafayette area, as you mentioned, or up, it looked like maybe north of Monroe, if I looked at the map right. And we don't have some strong ordinances in place that prevent the problems that come with the one, am I saying, am I making sense? So what do you, I mean, do you see this happening faster than we can prepare for it, or do you think this is a couple of years away, or?
Well, I would stress that, again, wind projects are very long development timelines, even land-based wind. It's not similar to solar where you can, order solar panels very quickly at this point. So there is more lead time than that. And then the other thing that I would note is I think one benefit for us is that there are 90,000 land-based wind turbines in this country, and people have a lot of experience regulating this at this point. There are many groups that have model ordinances that kind of show what they believe are the best reasons and why. Obviously, everyone has a different opinion on that, but I think especially what we can learn from places like Texas that have been regulating this for a long time and have really dealt with these landowner concerns is very actionable in a way that maybe solar wasn't at the time that conversation was happening. So I hope that there is, given how advanced this technology is, that there is information we can rely on.
Okay, well, I would agree with you probably that we could definitely look at Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, who have been doing this, and learn from any mistakes, just like we can learn from bad projects here on solar and do better moving forward. I guess my concern is that we, the state and the legislature and Department of Energy and Natural Resources and whoever else, that we get out in front of that so that we can have, if we're going to have wind, that we want it to be a good neighbor, we want the community to accept it, because I'm reading the same thing I'm reading about solar across the country, is people don't like it when it's not done right. And wind, I don't know a lot about the issues because I've been focusing on solar, but you have how close to your house, how noisy, the same. Now you're talking 700 feet high, and they are only apparently, according to you, maybe are 300 or 400 feet high currently in that area. But I know in Arkansas, this committee traveled to Arkansas, and we heard sad conversations about wind and solar in Arkansas and the opposition to that because they don't want these wind, in the areas of tourism on top of the Ozark Mountains, et cetera. And so it just seems like it comes with its own set of problems as well. And I want to make sure that we address those in advance if we can, so that if we're going to do them, that the community accepts them and it's not something that everybody just loves to hate. Am I making sense?
You are, and I fully agree with you.
All right. So you have models out there, and we have models. I think CPEX did one for solar, and we certainly are looking to that as we're drafting our solar package. But maybe moving forward, we can get those models and see if there's something that we could do, maybe to guide DENR to promulgate rules based on the model or whatever. But I really hope we don't have to come back, Mr. Vice Chair, 2 or 3 years from now and try to correct something that got out in front of us. So, thank you.
Absolutely.
Next question from Representative Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I just got a couple of questions, just because I don't know. This is kind of new to me. About what's the plan? About how far apart is these turbines going to be if they're placed in the Gulf and on land? I mean, what's the typical?
I hesitate to say that there's a typical spacing distance. I'll tell you the considerations. The typical considerations offshore would be that your turbines are far enough apart that they aren't causing turbulence for one another. So with how the wind moves over the ocean, if you're not spacing them properly, then you can, set some of your turbines in poor locations. Has James Martin gotten here yet? he would be able to tell. But so those are one of your concerns. I believe that the Block Island turbines are about half a mile apart. Am I correct on that? But again, I think that's one of those things that is highly location dependent.
They are, but they've subsequently standardized on 1 nautical mile separation, all the East Coast wind farms right now.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And then land-based is a similar calculation in terms of, how you can space them most appropriately. And land-based wind has the consideration of landowners, right? So you're making the best use of the property that you have access to.
Thanks. So last question. Can you just talk a little bit about the process and how it captures and converts and transmits the energy? How does that work?
Sure. This is actually one of my favorite things to talk about. So if you think about a natural gas power plant, what you are doing is you are burning that natural gas to turn a turbine, right? A large steel turbine that will generate electricity. So in a very real sense, offshore wind turbines are just tiny miniature versions of those that utilize the same process. And so when the turbines are spinning with the wind, they are generating electricity, and they actually generate electricity in alternate AC power and then convert that to DC and then back to AC in order to get consistent power production. So that happens within the turbine itself. And then there are many ways that you can hook your turbines to each other offshore, so you can have kind of insulated little grids that will continue to operate, whereas if you hook every single turbine together, if one goes offline, they'll all stop generating, essentially. So I feel like that is maybe a more advanced answer than you were looking for, but if I didn't answer your question, let me know.
No, you did. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Next, we'll go to Representative Coates, who has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So on the map with the little dots, so is that just one turbine, or is there going to be multiple for that project?
That would be a project, not a turbine.
Okay, so
if you, I don't have the interactive version of that map, but I can make sure to send it to the committee. Those dots are clickable, and so if you click on that project, you can see when they anticipate their COD to be, so their date of delivery of power, and also how large the project is. So do not quote me on this. I believe the 2 projects near Lafayette are 400 and 300 megawatts, but I can get that information to the committee.
And how many megawatts is per turbine?
Typically, a land-based turbine will generate 4.5 megawatts of nameplate capacity. So that is what it is consistently generating. They typically generate more than that, but you want to rate it for slightly lower than it's actually generating, right? So, but onshore turbines are typically between 4 and 6 megawatts, and offshore turbines can be anywhere between 12 and 18 megawatts.
So, and you said it was 400, so we're looking at about 100 of these?
Okay. I can tell you how much a turbine can generate and how much the project is, but yes, whatever. Okay. How the math shakes out is how it shakes out.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Early on in your presentation, you talked about offshore wind projects taking 10 years, but I didn't hear you give a temporal time frame for the onshore or on-land projects.
Land-based projects, I would say, are typically probably 4 to 5 years, I would say, with the caveat being that your kickoff date is really once you get private landowner agreements together. And so compared to the federal process where you're just winning a lease with a very obvious start date, that is one of the things with land-based projects that can take more time to coordinate, because you do have to get those landowner agreements together.
All right. And to Representative Mack and Representative Coates' general area of question, you talked about the offshore wind turbines being so much larger, an order of magnitude larger. I know you started it like, I know they all started small, but then kind of now we're in the 12, 15, 18 megawatt per single turbine, whereas the larger land-based ones are 4.5. So it's worth saying that the smaller form factor of the land-based ones are primarily due to the transportation and the infrastructure to get it down the road and to a facility, where all of the offshore infrastructure, basically, you don't have those limitations. The manufacturing facilities are on the ocean front, are basically on the waterfront, and these extremely large turbine components are transported by ship, generally to a marshaling yard and then subsequently to the installation for offshore. But for onshore, you got to get through roads, make turns, and everything else, and there's basic limitations on how big the land-based ones can be. I know another limitation was, for a while, looking at all the offshore wind leases on the East Coast, they all kind of had a number around 800 megawatts, and I think that was a limitation of the cable lines that would bring in, or one form with one pair of cables, a pair for redundancy, basically 800 megawatts. I think the CVOW project in Virginia, they're like tripling. They're basically doing one project that's really like three farms, and subsequently with three onshoring cables. I think that's the only other question I think I had was in Louisiana, or the last question, in Louisiana, any, the ones that you showed were the projects that are up for potential construction?
Yes, those are the projects that have entered into the MISO interconnection, which means that they have some landowner agreements and are at a solid enough process to enter the MISO interconnection queue. And I'll provide the committee more information on that queue and the information contained in it as well.
All right, thank you. And in preparation for this hearing, are there any other entities through which provided comment to you to provide, or you will only speaking for the Southeastern Wind Coalition?
I was only speaking for the Southeastern Wind Coalition.
Fantastic. All right, well, that's all the questions we got. We thank you very much.
Alrighty. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Next, we'll go to Mr. Cameron Poole with GNO Inc., if you don't mind taking the table. Ms. Netherton referred to your presentation quite a number of times, so you get to play clean up, or you're in the baseball analogy.
It's because I shared my thumb drive.
State your name for the record, sir.
Cameron Poole, Energy and Innovation Manager at Greater New Orleans, Inc. We're an economic development organization particularly serving, Southeast Louisiana, Orleans Parish and surrounding, but across our work of recent in the all of the above energy sector and ambitions of the state have really worked across the state and across South Louisiana to develop robust partnerships around these opportunities, including off and onshore wind. One of our initiatives is the GNO Wind Alliance, which is 250 plus companies strong, representing a lot of the local organizations who have already found or are pursuing supply chain and other opportunities in this sector, as well as those outside of the state who are looking to employ and procure from those organizations across these emerging opportunities. Looking forward to sharing some more information that we've found relevant to the supply chain and opportunity in particular for the state, which has been immense, particularly off the backs of Louisiana's expertise in offshore energy production and supply chain and servicing. Representative Ogeron briefly touched upon some of the early work. There was 9 companies involved in Block Island. That was the U.S.'s first offshore wind farm. So like most offshore energy production, that was enabled by Louisiana leadership, Louisiana companies, and our prowess in this space. But that's just a small and anecdotal number beyond what we have found in the last couple years of a ramp up in the national pipeline of projects. About 26% of all contracts in this domestic industry have been found with Louisiana and Gulf Coast suppliers. That's something that can scale alongside continued project development, particularly along the East Coast right now, as projects like our own a little bit earlier in that 10-year process that Jenny had alluded to in her presentation, which I think really speaks to the value of long-term planning, especially on behalf of the companies we look to service as an economic development organization and connecting them with future sectors like this. offshore wind is really important as it relates to a lot of the diversification and addition, really, that we're seeing in the state relevant to its energy opportunity. Gino Inc. has the pleasure on sitting on the state's hydrogen task force as well, and a number of other emerging energy interests in the state that all need power. We talked about Meta. We talked about a number of other projects that really are part of not just Louisiana, but the national dynamic for unprecedented energy growth. Something that's been relatively stable or constant over time is increasing exponentially. And from an economic development perspective, being able to tell project developers who come to our table for a number of manufacturing and well-paying projects, they're asking, where's our power and how are we going to get it in the state? And of course, we're not a utility. We can't speak on that too much, but we can say what we're seeing from a power generation perspective, what we're seeing be developed and planned to meet those investments' power delivery goals. And it's been very valuable to have offshore wind in the toolkit of those discussions when we're talking about the number of ways we are confident that a manufacturing facility, a data center, or any other production facility, such as what we're seeing in hydrogen and ammonia, will have the power it needs to operate and create valuable products that create well-paying jobs for our citizens, particularly, again, for us in the Gino region. But of course, we're seeing these projects materialize across the state and well beyond South Louisiana. I have the pleasure of participating in the state's offshore wind roadmap. I co-chair the Supply Chain and Workforce Committee, where I work very closely with the set of stakeholders who are really trying to better understand and enable where Louisiana companies can get a share in this opportunity and how we can support them. I'm very glad to submit to the committee the latest work on that, which was speedily published just in time for this to make sure it could be considered in whole. As alluded to and what we're following up here, past sessions, there was a supply chain and workforce analysis commissioned by the House that found tremendous potential. So a couple years ago, we had partnered with RWE, the developer of the federal offshore wind project, specifically off the backs of their investment in understanding how they can employ Louisiana's supply chain and workforce. Just in that first pass, we found 120 companies with high compatibility. Of course, that included those who had already engaged, but some who were just planning to. And I think it's important to understand, too, that when developers are looking at Louisiana, of course, there's always a value in hiring local to your project. But when it's a developer that's part of all three U.S. coastlines, investing in a project and saying, we know Louisiana's the best, help us work with them. That's exactly what we want to hear as an economic developer, and reads true to the promise that as the national industry grows, it is not just dependent upon where wind projects will happen off our coastlines. If they're happening nationally, we're going to see continued and sustained growth for our local companies here. So off the backs of that 120 company finding, we had an updated analysis done a little over a year ago that found 450 potential companies for engagement. Now, you have to understand that, of course, like other supply chains, you have your first tier or primary service providers, those that are going to directly interface with the project, and those that down tier 2 and 3 are the components for those components. There's things that go into the ships being built, such as by Edison Schwest, to service a supply chain, and pieces that go into the fabricated jackets by Keystone and others that go into the East Coast projects like Block Island. And so when you look fully down the value chain, there's a lot of opportunity that is also available to companies who might be our smaller and medium-sized businesses here. And of course, that's important. Not everyone can employ the business development team required to go pursue big contracts with big developments beyond where they're currently operating. So that's why we look at those numbers too. It really shows that this is an opportunity that is not just for the select few businesses operating in this space, and especially those who we've seen be early movers so far. The Supply Chain and Workforce Group has, again, updated this study based off the latest work done with companies already, off recent initiatives such as the Gulf Louisiana Offshore Wind Tech Hub, and other research initiatives that are continuing to bolster and expand upon what the opportunity for the state could mean and our suppliers mean in this space. So I strongly encourage its review in spare time. There's some great graphs if you don't want to get through all 70 pages of text there, but it's all really relevant to understanding that there's a level of detail to where this opportunity can be found. And if you look at the 5, 10-year and beyond pipeline of what is still a nascent and early industry, there's only sustained growth and billions to make for our companies here as just, again, another offshore energy opportunity for them to engage in. We've also just found so far that offshore wind fills really well the ups and downs on sprint to delivery for offshore oil and gas construction exploration. So point being, these are not competitive resources. They're in fact very complementary, especially for the suppliers whose businesses are really built around servicing offshore energy production. And of course, that's true for our ports too. Was very happy to see Port Fourchon evoked in the previous presentation as the 99% of offshore operations already happening from this port. A lot of those same service providers being those engaged in offshore wind to date. An example of, again, Louisiana's legacy being carried forward in the energy applications we're seeing emerge, like offshore wind. So I will stop there, open to any questions remaining.
We're going to start with Representative Mack, who has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I appreciate you. Just a quick question. You've talked about the job growth, or how can you give some details on how installation of these turbines, generates jobs? What were we talking about? Logistics? We're talking about construction? We're talking about maintenance? And give us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, great question. I think often what's lost behind talking about supply chain and company engagement is that there's people behind those companies. And in the same way I talked about the supply chain opportunity being across the value chain, same for workforce. So all of the above on how you sort of went down that list of questioning. So it's not just Louisiana vessels, right? We're not sending empty vessels up there to work these projects now or in the future. Those are our offshore maritime professionals. So same thing for across the installation, operations, and maintenance value chain. You are seeing Louisiana mariners up there. If you think about, of course, other states have coastlines. They don't have working coastlines. So in the same way our supply chain is strategically built off the history in oil and gas and servicing how you build components like that. The same for our workforce. It's really one of a kind. So you're seeing a lot of Louisiana workers on those U.S. flagged Louisiana ships up there working right now. The manufacturing opportunity is where reports like ours and the National Renewable Energy Laboratories find that there's larger job growth. Of course, when you're building and operating something, those are periodic deployments, whereas if you're running a factory, right, those are day in and out jobs. Some manufacturing facilities running 24 hours, such as our refining and other chemical manufacturing facilities. So a lot of potential there, particularly on those fabricated steel components, the foundations that the turbines sit on. And what's great is there's a lot of compatibility. It's not just being left complacent to assume that those workers will then be hired and find their way into it. So a lot of immediate leadership from Nunez Community College and Fletcher, who have well-established maritime professional and offshore professional training curriculum, getting Global Wind Organization or just a standard accreditation towards wind energy. So knowing that those students can go on that ship and work a platform well and make a good living in the same way if that ship's headed towards a turbine, they can do the same. So a lot of workforce potential, and it's, again, across the value chain, such as like our supply chain.
Do you anticipate or have you heard of any of these manufacturing facilities being on the coast of Louisiana?
Very exciting. So I sit on the business development team of GNO Inc. So we work with a lot of companies who are looking at Louisiana for a project, and our job is to make sure they land here, right? Lay the case, make sure they have the right partnerships in place, right relationships with our state partners and agencies as well. And we've had a number of exciting opportunities, particularly as it relates to the component manufacturing or those high-scale manufacturing opportunities. A number of NDAs in place that preclude me from going to a company name and title, but I can confidently, for the record, say yes. In the same way, our logistics make a lot of sense for break, bulk, and heavy component trade as containerized, but something we specialize in. That opportunity really relates to what Jenny was covering on onshore wind growth. So onshore wind components, because they need to get taller, implies bigger pieces that also can't get on rail or highway. So us being the gateway of the Mississippi is ever relevant there. And same thing with Port Fourchon, Port of Lake Charles, and Avondale. We have ports that are really built on moving big pieces that we'll continue to see that opportunity for.
Last question. This one's going to be tough. So what are the negativities? I mean, what could be negative about moving forward with this type of project? I mean, I don't know. It sounds pretty positive to me. I mean, what could be negative? I mean, job creation, supplemental energy. I mean, are you allowed to speak on that?
Yeah, I
don't want to get you in
this
trouble.
project, I think you're referring to just like the sector being here and
just
finding a home in Louisiana.
Yeah.
I mean, GNO Inc. has worked very closely with our industry partners and other on, the all of the above strategy. But I think why this has been a centerpiece, as our CEO says it really does just make sense. So I know a lot of the speakers here, including myself, are to lay a case on that value. I think it's always, per the chair's questions earlier, it's always about responsible development too, and that could be the con. We've talked about past energy developments not being a good neighbor, and we wouldn't want wind to be an exception to that. But if it's done responsibly, if we develop a market like what we talked about that warrants investment of these facilities, it is a pretty good deal for Louisiana.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you, Rep. Mack. The only comment or question I had was you had talked about the 120 original companies. These are like first starter companies. Those of the companies with similar business models related to the ones that had helped in or are currently actually active on the East Coast wind, right?
Correct.
And then you said the second order would be the downstream companies that help those companies put out their products, and the number was 450?
Correct. Let's say 400 plus, because those are the past reports, so I don't want to misrepresent. But correct, when you look at the full value chain.
And coming from my district where so much of the industry was directly tied to oil and gas, the price of the oil, price of a barrel of oil, and the ups and downs, basically having this alternative revenue stream and something where the job parity, as you said, is nearly identical, whether it's the supply chain or the workforce activities, the work, whether or not the money that's paying your salary is coming from someone harvesting hydrocarbons or someone harvesting air pressure, you might not care. You're still doing the same job. And I think for my constituency, that's probably the biggest play. It's all of the above is all of the above, and we're engaged with it. It's just we've been doing one type of job for so long, and now we finally have another energy job that's not related to the price of oil that we could make a living from, which gives us a stability facet, makes all operations more stable. Was there any other testimony in the roadmap to the stabilizing effect of having an alternative energy format for all of these mainly 120 core companies to operate in?
So I would say the roadmap particularly focuses on different investment level scenarios, meaning how much wind nationally and globally, and then the potential Louisiana role in that based on current capture. I think knowing that it's happened, much of that work preceded the recent call to bolster OCS offshore hydrogen or hydrocarbon production as well. What you said about stabilizing is really relevant, right? When you have to, as a company, invest significantly to meet additional offshore platform demand and production, when you have to ramp up for that, you don't want it to be a cliff at the end of that on what your vessels that you've built for this project or otherwise are being used for. So having, exactly like you said, a very complementary type of project that uses those between those big boosts of offshore oil and gas production is exactly the role that we've seen wind start to play.
Let me give one more tangible aspect of the modifications that are happening to some of the Gulf of Mexico vessels to go work up on the East Coast or stabilize walk-to-work platforms. Some of us here know what it's like to transfer in a personnel basket. It's a little shady, being swung in a basket from a boat to a platform, and the the wind developers have basically standardized on, we're not going to do that. We're going to basically have computerized, hydraulically articulated gangways that compensate for all the moves of the motion of the vessel. And subsequently, whenever they're done doing whatever they're doing, all of that technology will come back to the Gulf of Mexico and make working here in the Gulf more safe. So it's added advantage, I would think, in that aspect.
Yeah, I can't say I've been on many offshore vessels myself, but the Echo Edison, the Edison Schwest vessel, you're right, it is employing that exact technology. It's pushing forward our offshore innovation, and it will bear fruit for our other existing sectors as well.
Thank you. Getting everybody home safely with 10 fingers and 10 toes. Thank you. That's all the questions on the board. We appreciate your testimony. Very valid. Moving along, next person I have a card from is Ms. Stacy Ortego with the National Wildlife Federation. Yes. Thank you very much for coming to testify.
Thank you for having me.
Please. And I would like to also mention for the record that Representative Carrier has joined us as well.
No, I'm sorry I'm late. I tried to walk here from a bit ago.
Thank you very much for coming here.
So I have just a few brief comments I would like to make. Hi everyone, my name is Stacy Ortego. I'm here representing National Wildlife Federation. And since 1936, NWF has become one of the largest and most trusted voices in habitat and wildlife conservation and restoration in the United States. NWF stands firmly behind the responsible development of offshore wind energy for Louisiana. We define that responsible development to avoid, minimize, mitigate, and monitor for adverse impacts on wildlife and habitats, minimize negative impacts on other ocean uses, include robust consultation with Native American tribes and communities, meaningfully engage state and local governments and other interested and affected parties from the outset, include comprehensive efforts to avoid negative impacts to underserved communities, and use the best available science and technological data to ensure science-based, community-informed decision-making. The greatest threat facing wildlife and habitats, including in Gulf waters and coastlines, is a rapidly changing climate. Rising ocean temperatures, acidification, and stronger, more frequent storms disrupt ecosystems, alter food chains, and may shift migration patterns into heavily trafficked shipping channels, increasing risk for marine life. By expanding the availability of Louisiana's energy resources, offshore wind will help alleviate the impacts of climate change, spur economic development, help address rising demand for affordable, reliable energy, and create local jobs. In Gulf waters, where there are substantial existing energy infrastructure and activities, it's especially important to understand that the sounds produced by offshore wind surveys are significantly lower in intensity and impact than those generated by oil and gas or military activities. One species of particular concern is the endangered Risus whale. Recognizing the importance of protecting Risus whales, NWF urged the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to exclude known Risus whale habitat from consideration during the Gulf's offshore wind leasing process. As a result of these early comments, offshore wind activity will take place far from Risus whale habitat and will be less generally impactful than oil and gas development. As offshore wind developers draft construction operation plans, NWF and our partners advocate for risk reduction measures, including foundations that require less pile driving or none, bubble curtains to reduce construction noise, large separation distance requirements between vessels and marine mammals, vessel speed restrictions, trained observers, thermal and acoustic detection systems on board, and limiting impactful activities during times of highest risk. Although we recognize the impact any infrastructure project has on habitats, offshore wind energy both reduces carbon emissions created during energy production and does not carry the same potential harm of oil spills or canal dredging. We are proud to participate in the development of the state's offshore wind roadmap development process. We remain concerned about plans to develop offshore wind energy in state waters and will work to ensure the needed protections are in place should those projects move forward. We're also grateful to Representative Ogeron for the Louisiana State Constitutional Amendment directing funding generated by offshore wind energy development to support coastal restoration efforts as part of a revenue sharing opportunity. With that, I thank you for these comments.
Any questions? Anybody have any questions? Nobody? Well, the board's clear. We thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate that. Continuing to move along, we've got a card wishing to speak, Ms. Monica Gearhart. Folks back there from Gulf States Renewable Energy Industries.
Hi, I'm Monica Gerhardt. Excuse me. I'm the Executive Director of Gulf States Renewable Energy Industries. Thank you so much for taking the time. I had brought up my computer to respond to Ripco's question, but I see that she's moved on. So thank you so much for taking the time for this, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Monica Gerhardt, as I mentioned. Gulf States Renewable Energy is a trade association of companies in all parts of the renewable energy supply chain, including manufacturers, electricians, installers, independent power producers, and a wide gambit of employers in this field. And as you know, I'm going to keep this quick. Wind and solar energy are among the lowest cost energy resources available and can provide a hedge against energy pricing volatility, which we've talked about in this room. So expanding wind generation really encourages private investment and economic development in our state, which we've also heard a lot from our previous speakers. In the past, we've prioritized dispatchable resources such as natural gas and nuclear, and need to continue to equally just consider new energy resources that can deploy much more quickly, right? And can be paired with storage to provide similar or greater reliability benefits. Modern grid technologies enable renewables to offer firm capacity and can diversify our energy supply. So, offshore wind energy development certainly provides a unique opportunity to add transmission capacity offshore as well to provide value to the grid. And I know that there was also some conversation around transmission and distribution previously, just to kind of double click on that for one moment. Because the grid will continue to become more heavily congested overall, offshore transmission infrastructure can be leveraged to reduce overall system costs for the entire system. So new wind energy projects, offshore in particular, could be supported through shared transmission systems and workforce. So there are a couple of different planning processes that are all happening at the same time, simultaneously or concurrently. Certainly the National Coordination Office for Space-Based Positioning, Navigation, and Timing, and BOEMs have led this extensive work that Vice Chairman Ogeron talked about in terms of deconflicting the Gulf and deconflicting the floor. This includes spatial planning of corridors that are deconflicted for pipelines and/or transmission, and which the federal leaseholder will have the first right to review. The state master plan for offshore wind, which we've also talked about extensively, and that is simultaneous or concurrent. So I think that in terms of between the state offshore wind master plan, the federal deconflicting of the Gulf, and then even at the PSC, the Energy Future Ready Resilience Plan, which includes transmission and capital investments for bulk electric system reliability through new lines, substations, and equipment upgrades, I expect that the state's master plan may inform some potential amendments to the Future Ready Resilience Plan, which is supposed to be in place from 2024 to 2033. So all of these, I think, will help to inform very specific steps to provide a path for offtake in the Gulf. And I would expect that any analysis consider transmission upgrades, preferred resources such as storage, energy storage, grid-enhancing technologies, and remedial action schemes. So I have like a little list of some reliability policy-driven projects that may be an outcome of this, or they're a little bit specific, but I think the overall point is that transmission and distribution will be critical. Like all energy, we can't have nice things unless we have the capacity to move electrons around. And I think the key to this in terms of diversification is just diversification is the key to prevent blackouts, if nothing else, right? When we think about the overall system. And there's diversification in terms of the technology, and there's diversification in terms of geography and where we're inputting into the system. And so thank you for your time. That's all I wanted to share. And I did have a little information about the energy mix during the winter storm that we experienced, what was that, January, that I'm happy to submit to the committee as well.
Thank you. Please pass it to the Sergeant at Arms, and we'll make sure that that gets included. I have only 2 other cards and present and willing to provide information if requested. Mr. Scott Eustace with Healthy Gulf. Would you like to come up and say a word? I appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir. And Mr. Dan Clater, who's here, speak if necessary, right? Thank you, sir, for coming here. All right, Mr. Eustace.
Hello. My name is Scott Eustace. I'm the Community Science Director for Healthy Gulf, and been reviewing coastal use permits for the past 14 years with the organization, which has been working from Corpus to Tampa, roughly, in the Gulf for about 30 years. And we support wind done right, and I think it basically, just to piggyback on Stacy's comment, we support it done right. There's some things we're looking for, and we'll be reviewing the coastal use permits. But in general, we support the industry because they've come in with some very good marine spatial planning. And just from the jump, it's been an industry that's taken a lot of our concerns very seriously. And then the footprint is smaller. I review a lot of coastal wetland permits. You compare a pipeline to a transmission line right away, the footprint is smaller, less of an impact, safer. So, we do want to support maritime activity on the Gulf. We think it's a really important sector. We think the growth and sustaining that sector is really important for other industries like coastal restoration and decommissioning and cleanup, which I've got some research on that's not ready for prime time, but we'd love to stay in touch with you on some of the numbers we have on just the amount of stuff that's out there in Lafourche and Plaquemines Parish. It's increasing at a rate we find concerning. And, we really think a healthy maritime industry helps stop a lot of the oil spills that we see in southern Louisiana. So, just briefly wanted to say that Healthy Gulf supports wind power done right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know at one point in time, conversations with indigenous tribes, there were many of them being commercial fishermen, their primary concerns. I remember you speaking about losing fishing grounds and areas. And just recently, right around the Super Bowl time, I had attended one of my local Lafourche Parish tribal meetings, and what they commented on was whether or not some of the pipelines that they get snagged on, any potential for that being cleaned up if we allow offshore wind. So you heard me ask Mr. Canefield with DNR, and it was pretty much them coming around to saying, well, we might be able to support this if they're doing more benefit to the environment than detriment, by helping clean up to be able to put their infrastructure in. So that was a kind of a step change for the comments that I was receiving from them. So, yes. And I remember you being a speaker on that particular thing. So I appreciate your comments. Got one question from Chairman Guyman.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I came in a little late when you got up, and you may have mentioned it, but do you have any concerns about the onshore projects? I heard you mentioning offshore, but are there any concerns for any of the potential onshore that maybe we need to be considering?
Yes, we are Healthy Gulf, so forgive me if we've been very focused on the coastal zone and offshore in the ocean in particular. I think any project has a footprint. You want zoning, you want buffers. I just have to say, I spend 90% of my job looking at pipelines, gas pipelines that can incinerate a house from 1,000 feet away. That you want a 1-mile evacuation buffer. That residents around that gas pipeline, they want hazard insurance. CO2 pipelines, 2 miles away, since the material does not ignite, you're concerned about residents 2 miles from that CO2 pipeline. we just don't see the hazard profile of the transmission lines like we do with gas pipelines and especially these CO2 pipelines. So,
So no big issues on onshore?
you know,
just
I
like,
think-
or on the top of your list. I mean, I'm not saying there wouldn't be a couple of things, but nothing big.
We're looking at the transmission line network as it exists. That's probably going to have to expand. I think we would not want a brand-new right-of-way through the Atchafalaya River Basin, for example. Atchafalaya River Basin's got a lot of hydrological issues. Long story, it's a very special place on Earth to protect. So, we wouldn't want the footprint to be excessive in that area or for, say, on our wildlife management areas where a lot of our members go to those places to recreate. So I think those are the kinds of issues that we're looking at, and particularly in the coastal zone where we have a permitting regime. As you move north, I think I'm less experienced with.
Is there any migratory issues with, I know earlier they mentioned the project in Lafayette. So let's just say that, I'm not sure exactly where that is going to be placed, but let's say it's in Eunice or whatever, in the Lafayette region, Acadiana region. And they're 700 feet tall, and there's, I think Representative Coates figured out there would be 100 based on the quick math. So let's say there's 100, 700 foot tall in this project around Acadiana, and I don't know if that's a migratory path or not, but let's just say it is. Is that an issue, or have you looked at that yet?
The literature that I know just suggests that oil and gas and the waste pits we have in Jennings and Morgan City and Grand-Bois kill so many more migratory birds than.
Why are you picking on Jennings, man? You didn't have to do that. I'm trying to pick on Jacob Landry there.
We'd like
you turn it right back on me, like.
Those we're aware of those large exploration and production waste pits as sources of mortality for migratory birds. Beyond specifics of the Lafayette region, I'm not the best, and I think you want to talk to Eric
Fair
at
enough.
Audubon.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
That's fine. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Eustace, that's all the questions we have. Mr. Cleater, I see you moved seats to.
I'll probably sit
There you go. I could turn either one on, but
All right.
you've already.
No,
moved.
it just, Dan Claytor Chabert, representing the Southern Renewable Energy Association, 27 members strong. We provided a handout and just wanted to remind those that perhaps I haven't visited with before that we want to be a resource for you if you need information. Don't have anything to add today. In that packet, it has the names of the particular vessels that we were talking about and things of that sort. So.
Thank you very much. That's was going to be the last and final task, was to read in those, I think, 3 items I have in front of me right here that did not have anyone speaking explicitly on their behalf, but you did on the this paper, primarily by ACP, American Clean Power, talking about specifics on advances in turbine blade disposal processes and recyclability, the property values on onshore or on land wind, wind and power, wildlife and power intersects, and current things being looked at. And then, of course, lastly, as you mentioned, all the U.S. flag vessels currently operating in a role up on the East Coast. And what I noticed by going through this list is these are only contracted vessels, none of the spot markets like the lift boats that my family had historically operated are listed in there, because those were basically like calling a cab, basically pick you up on one side of the town and bring you off. The vessels that are listed here are long-term, 5-year contracts, etc. So we got that from your organization and American Clean Power. We have Pew that did this Louisiana offshore supply chain study work that we're going to introduce. And lastly, Nunez, that was mentioned a few times, Community College, who I know is training, one of our Louisiana Community Technical College systems that's training students in GWO, or Global Wind Organization, which is a curriculum very, very close to what all offshore mariners have to take, called STCW. It's pretty much, GWO is almost identical, same format of work from height, hazardous material identification, first aid, firefighting, helicopter, underwater egression classes. All of those same things that you have to be trained in to work offshore is what the offshore wind industry, and actually onshore, is mandating that their technicians be trained in, and Nunez is providing that. And I think that is all the cards that we have. No more cards, right? And with that, you need any closing comments, Mr. Chairman? I appreciate everyone coming here. Can I get a motion from Mr. Landry? You ready to adjourn, sir? Motion, and all right. No objections. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.